Welcome back, guys. We are making even more progress on the cargo e-bike build. Today we're going to be tackling the custom seat, and I'm hoping it goes well because this is only the second seat that I have ever made or attempted to make in my entire life. Thankfully, seats are pretty easy to make. You just need a seat pan, something squishy to sit on, and then something to cover the squishiness that you're sitting on. That's pretty much it, and you also need a way to mount it to the bike frame, and I'm just using riv nuts in this piece of wood that I had previously made in one of the earlier episodes. I wanted to make my own seat because most regular bicycle seats are not that comfortable, and I have found that most of the motorcycles and mopeds and other type of cycles that are like that, the seats are generally much more comfortable than a traditional or standard bike seat. Another task in this video is taking care of a bunch of odds and ends that need to happen before I can strip this frame down and start painting it. And one of those things is making another mounting hole for one of the 3D printed parts that I showed you guys in a previous episode. I really do need to invest in some new drill bits because it seems like every one that I have takes forever to drill through things that it shouldn't. I know at least some of you guys do not like witnessing me use screws as a tap, but trust me, I have used taps before, and the time that I did, I was trying to cut some very soft aluminum and it broke the tool immediately. So I've never had a problem using some hardened screws to make some threads, even in tougher material like steel. So I'm going to continue doing that. I don't know how many times I had to iterate this part to get the front mounting hole to land exactly there because both sides are not perfectly symmetrical, so I had to tailor each one to try and get it to line up as best I could. It was quite a bit. But it was worth the effort because it lines up perfectly and it is rock solid. I don't know why it always seems like I have to make my designs much more complicated than they need to be. I could have just made this seat a rectangle and called it a day, but no, I wanted to add 3 more inches of length to the seat, which means it has to now conform around the mounts and standoffs that I have for the cargo bins, and yeah, it's just a whole new thing that I gotta deal with. I do think that it does make it look more visually interesting, and it also kind of tapers towards the back, which flows with the design a little bit more, so it is worth the effort, but I could have made it a lot easier on myself. I'm gonna be honest, I don't really know how to make seats, and I didn't even watch any YouTube videos or tutorials, which I probably should have. I just bought some foam that I thought was gonna work, and then I'm trying it out. So this is all kind of like a prototype, but it does allow me to reflect on what I have learned and give you guys that information. So my thinking was I will use a high density black foam for the base layer that is going to be not as compressible and is going to give me more support. Then I went with this 1-inch thick white foam, which is much lower density and much squishier for comfort. Another thing to note is that I oversized the foam from the seat pan, so you can see that the foam extends past the end of the seat, which I actually wanted because if you're going to sit down on it, you don't want to feel the edge of the seat pan and you don't want your thighs to be kind of cut in with a harsh edge. So I wanted the foam to be oversized so that when you sit down and squish on it, that it's going to actually kind of overlap the seat pan. The other material that I'm working with is just this very soft and stretchable vinyl, which I think is much easier to work with than real leather because of how much it stretches, and you can kind of press and conform it around the foam and get it to work like that. Then I just used some industrial staples and stapled it to the wood. I quickly realized that making a seat functional is pretty easy, but making one look nice is much harder. I also realized that there's a reason why most seats do have seams that are sewn, because to do this all in one piece of material, it is much harder to make it look seamless. To get rid of some of the seams, I first tried to cut one of the edges, but that just looked terrible. So then I went on to just trying to get creative with my folding and overlapping, and that came out a lot better, although it's not ideal or perfect. You're probably wondering why I left the seat pan rectangular even though the seat itself has these cornered edges, and in retrospect, I don't really know why I did this either. I guess I figured I would slide the seat pan underneath the cargo bin racks and that it was going to be fine. It did work, but it just didn't look as nice when you didn't have the cargo bins attached to it. I decided to chop off these edges in order to make it look better when the cargo bins are not attached to the bike, so that it will look good with both of the configurations. Doing a design change like this does come with its problems, and one of those was that the riv nuts I chose to use for the seat pan are incredibly easy to cross thread. So I got one of those stuck, had to rip it out of the seat pan, which I guess is fine because I'm going to be chopping off these corners anyway. But another problem is my mounting holes now don't touch the seat pan, so I got to move those up in the frame. Aside from those very small changes I have to make, I'm pretty much completely done with all the fabrication on this bike, and I've done my 3D printed mock-ups and everything is fitting how I want it, so now I just have to take it all apart and start prepping it for painting. This riv nut I'm adding to the frame is extra support for the rear brake mount / torque arm that is integrated into the rest of the subframe. It turns out cutting the corners off of that seat posed even more problems because I couldn't just move the brackets up because now they interfere with the controller. So to remedy that, instead of using two separate mounting holes, I'm just going with one in the middle for the back, but it's not that big of a deal because this seat fits very tightly into the frame rails that I probably don't even need to mount it from the bottom, but I like to do this just for some extra security. I thought I was being smart by dropping the riv nuts in through the top of the seat pan. That way the entire lip of the top of the riv nut would be helping to catch onto and hold onto the wooden seat pan. I'm pretty sure now that this is what was causing all of the cross-threading things for whatever reason. If you try to thread a riv nut in upside down or backwards, then it is much harder to screw in. Here's one tip I got from one of my viewers, and that is because I can't compress the riv nut too much, it's just gonna break the wood eventually. So I went with some JB Weld and just stuck the riv nut in that way, and that works pretty well. It's very possible that these are just some very cheap and low quality, not very well made riv nuts, and maybe I should have went with some steel ones and then I wouldn't have so many cross-threading issues, but I made it work and I only ended up blowing up one riv nut, which thankfully was easy to get out of there. Now that the seat is of a different shape, I did some creative folding to try and make the folds look as finished as possible. It's not gonna look like a factory product because I'm not that good at making seats yet, but it is decent. I was actually pretty impressed with how this came out because it looks pretty good. It's not perfect, obviously, but it's not bad. For a first attempt at a finished seat, it's not bad. It could definitely be better, and I think with some practice, maybe even getting into some sewing, getting some patterns and different types of paneling, it could look even nicer. But for a kind of quick and dirty version of a seat that is somewhat finished looking, it's not bad. I can tell you guys with confidence from the future, having ridden this bike and sat down on this seat many of times, it is very comfortable and I am happy with how it came out. However, I would have changed up the foam density ratios. I used not a lot of the black foam and much more of the white foam, which is much squishier, and I think if I remade this seat, I would have done it the other way around, where most of the foam is the supportive higher density foam, and then maybe just a smaller, thinner layer of the squishier kind of comfort foam. I'm sure it's all based on preference, but for me, even though the seat is very comfortable, I would like a little bit more support in the seat, and next time when I make another seat, I will be using much more of the higher density foam. With the seat being finally completed, I can move on to the rest of the build, and I have all the parts pretty much broken down to their smallest components, and with that I'm just doing a whole ton of sanding because I am prepping these to finally get some paint. We are getting dangerously close to the end of this build, and I don't know if the next episode will be the final one. I think that there are some odds and ends and also some extra 3D printed parts that I do have to make for it, but aside from that, we're almost there, and then I'm ready to finally unveil what this bike looks like, how it performs, all that in the final episode. This is one of my more favorite parts of a build right before I'm painting, even though it is annoying and you have to do a bunch of things that you don't want to do, like strip down every single piece of the bike, as well as get rid of any things that are going to mess with your paint or make it look bad, like removing any stickers or any sticky residue that's going to be on there. Then you have to sand all of the parts, and that just takes a really long time, and even though all of this is kind of tedious and not that fun to do, there is much more excitement and anticipation because once you start throwing paint on a project, it dramatically changes the way it looks. It makes it look so much more finished, and I'm really excited to show you guys what this end result looks like, because if you remember, this bike was basically trash. I found it and in the trash, and it was not a great bike and not in very good shape. So to see what this bike looked like to what it does now is a pretty dramatic difference. It was a lot of prep work to get it all to this point, and when I'm looking at all these pieces, they don't look that complicated, but this was a lot of thought that went into this build, and unfortunately I didn't want to make this video go for too long, so we are going to have to save all of the painting for the next episode, but I assure you it is going to be worth the wait because this bike is going to look really cool. I can't wait to show you guys how this turns out. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.